When I have questions about what's going on in healthcare, like especially with regards to IT and things like that, I think of you. I think maybe we spoke a couple years ago now. I lose track of time. What with life and everything. But here, this episode, we have JT Perry, who works here with me at Tanzu. You were on the Tanzu Value Advisor team. You work just kind of general, itinerant. You remember that you're the subject matter errant when it comes to healthcare and things like that. Talking with our customers and people we talk with about kind of applying our whole Tanzu way of thinking about getting better at software, data management, all that stuff in the healthcare world. So thanks for being on again.
Hey, pleasure to always speak with you, sir. And yeah, I'll let my ego take that introduction. As an introduction, been here about 3 years, and before that, involved in several companies. Primera Blue Cross here in the United States is probably the best known one.
Yeah. So it's always good to talk with someone who's not just a pure thought leader like myself, who's huffing the good ideas as they go. You've actually worked on these things. You've huffed bad ideas in addition to the good
absolutely.
ones. Well, so the first thing I wanted to talk about, like I thought it would be, let's call it update on, you'll have to tell me when we get to it what people call this, but digital healthcare in general, right? There's always a lot going on. But what I've been really interested in recently, just like everyone, of course, I'm interested in generative AI. And I'm just going to say AI.
Yep.
No need to get all persnickety. You can if you want, but that's fine. But I've really been trying to figure out like what it means in enterprises beyond, well, not even beyond, but just like I use it all the time. I don't know about you. Like I'm probably spending too much money on ChatGPT and Gemini and other things, but whatever. So I use it all the time for all sorts of things. And I've almost reached like, I feel like the limit of things I can do with it in my life. Like there's a lot of like work things I can't do with it because I'm a good corporate citizen and I don't like cut and paste all the work stuff in there. So like I only use it for my personal stuff and my podcasts and like public things, if that makes sense. So I don't know if it's good for summarizing meetings or like all this kind of stuff, but what I'm also really interested in is if we look at various industries, like what people are thinking about doing with it, and like the potential for all the AI stuff to help out. So that's the first like question is like, what are people? Well, let's do first, like, what are they actually doing with AI right now? Like, and then we'll get to the more speculative things, like what it might be used to, but what are some applications that people are doing?
So in a lot of ways, I think, and some of this could own it, my own bias, because that's where I pay the most attention. But it feels like healthcare has had kind of a head start or a significant amount of interest with the current kind of just explosion of activity and investment, and even production in the AI space, right? And the biggest one that we are seeing like things already happen is in the radiological space. And by that, I mean all the diagnostic stuff, right? X-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, nuclear, all of those kind of things. And a lot of that is because it was happening, the interest and the experimentation was happening before kind of ChatGPT and OpenAI and all of that took out. Right. I think we would have called it machine learning, right, before we decided AI. Two major providers in this space, both Siemens and GE Healthcare, and without having direct knowledge of their stuff, just even what they've talked about publicly and you know, kind of dinner barroom type conversations, we know that they have been using it for a period of time to help with diagnostic. And I'll give an example. An MRI, you know, they put some body part in the tube, take, you know, thousands of pictures and put them together. And it is important to realize those are 1,000 pictures, right? Well, that radiologist, so the doctor that looks at those and tries to kind of come up with a so what about that, has to look at each one of those pictures, right? You could think of it as a slideshow. Now there's all sorts of tools. They can scroll their mouse or whatever and make it look like a movie and all of that. But human nature happens, right? So if I was going in for an MRI to say, look at my left lung because I somebody thought something was going on in there. You go on and say, I'm going to get an MRI. They tell the radiologist, hey, we're looking at something in the left lung. Well, meanwhile, the MRI was of your whole body, of your whole chest, right? As a doctor, as I'm scrolling through that and I'm looking at your left lung, I might not see that other spot over on your right side, right? Because I'm looking at how many of these a day, and I just need to crunch through those. So that's where we're starting to see a lot of these tools happen, right? Is using AI to go, hey, doc, go look at that.
So if I were to generalize that, because I think you're making me think there is a generalization of, let's call it enterprise AI, which is, we'll use tech terms. We'll use like some tech terms, which is you can scale a human's effort. And in that instance, like that example is great because, it's interesting because you're constrained by the expert's time, by the human's time. And so one of the behaviors that they have to do by necessity is focus on just one thing. So in a sense, like if they're looking at your left lung, they're throwing out all this data, all this opportunity to also look at other things. So it actually makes probably, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but it definitely makes economic sense and probably even diagnostic sense, because then you can, I don't know the ethics of radiology, but you can look at more people to help more people instead of focusing all of your time there. So the scaling is sort of like, well, what if we had, like, instead of just one entity, one human looking at it, now we can kind of simulate like 5 people looking at this one thing to catch other stuff that's going on.
Yeah, it is scale. And I would say it's both sides of the ethical box, so to speak, too, right? A really positive one, right? Let's use these computers to check everything and be that backstop, right? And say, oh no, hey, look, here's something here. Maybe it's smaller than, frankly, a human eye would pick up, right? It's a
right.
AI. But then there is the other side where, in general, and again, not to speak for anybody that's actually doing this, they feel like it's a great assistive technology right now. It's not something that should be used to diagnose by itself, meaning it shouldn't be the doctor in itself. It should go, hey, doc, I think he broke his arm. And the doctor should go, well, yes, you broke your arm, right? That's maybe too obvious a one, but something like that. We do know that there are countries that don't have enough radiologists out there that are kind of basically going, good enough. We'll just use this as diagnostic.
Right.
There is some ethical question of that, right? I mean, it's not, nobody's even tried to put it through like a FDA trial here in the United States to be the sole diagnostic. It goes through lots of trials to be this assistive technology. So,
well, I mean, that brings up a side note I wanted to ask later, but we'll side note here, which is like what, like I would imagine, I mean, this gets in a weird squishy space, but like, is there like medical innovation that happens in less regulated regions out of necessity that kind of comes back to more highly regulated? Because I could see kind of in this instance, if you were in some remote place that didn't have a lot of radiologists, I mean, you could almost have like some rudimentary stuff and get like a Starlink satellite uplink, just like uploaded to somewhere. And I don't know what, right? But there's all this kind of weird stuff. And remote health seems like fraught, except if you have to, like back in COVID, as we talked about last time, like it's just like all sorts of crazy stuff happens. But sometimes like necessity might like cause interesting innovation to happen.
Well, I think that's been true in healthcare all along, right? Nothing brings out innovation in healthcare like a good crisis. Look at the mRNA technology around vaccines and all of that, right? It looked good on paper. People were really excited about it. And then COVID happened and now it's become the silver bullet, right? For aspect. We won't go too far down a tangent, but the obesity crisis and bringing in Ozempic, and now us looking at the semaglutide that makes Ozempic go, and realizing all these other cool things that might do too, right? But again, let's fall down a big rabbit hole if we go too far there. But I would say in general,
right.
Yes, in that I don't know that necessarily innovation in those areas is bringing it back, but it gives the opportunity for wide scale testing. And again, there's an ethical issue about that, right? Do people even know they're being a test case, so to speak? So I don't think any of those companies would consciously, honestly go, hey, let's go give it to that rural area that doesn't have great healthcare and let's see what happens. It's more of the pull, right? Those areas, those governments go and grab this technology and use it. and we all look at kind of the outputs of that. But it's an ethical mess, and it's a, you can have a lot of conversations over a lot of beverages on should we or shouldn't we. We learned a lot of good information out of this horrible scenario. Can we use it? Should we use it? Big philosophical books have been written in that space in the healthcare world.
Well, back to the AI stuff. So yeah, I can see that that is one of the things that it wouldn't occur to me as an enterprise AI application, because it is basically images, analyzing images. That brings up one sort of structural issue with AI stuff, which, just to confirm with you, it's a lot of, at least my thinking, but probably our thinking of how to apply enterprise AI is limited by the fact that we consume it as a chat application, essentially, right? Whereas that's just one way of doing AI. And as I'm thinking more about this, and just as you brought up, it seems like there's a lot of applications beyond that are kind of hard to see, essentially. So anyways, I mean, that kind of opens up the aperture for like all sorts of other things. But what are some other things beyond radiology?
A lot of drug research, a lot of solutions, a lot of kind of think about the what if type scenario of what if, today I have chemical A and chemical B and it gives me Tylenol. Well, what if I took chemical B and chemical C? Would it give me like something to cure cancer? Right. I don't even mean to be flippant about that. Like the research around these diseases that we've never been able to like crack open and solve, ALS, right? Those big ones, Alzheimer's, one super, super close to me. What can AI help us? Can it give us ideas, things we haven't thought of? I don't know that anybody realistically expects to go into ChatGPT and go, here's 1,000 case records, help me solve this, right? But could it
right
down to just, almost an idea generator? Hey, this might work.
Yeah.
Go look down at that area. Or the common, I'm going to bring it back to a geek example that I see in our enterprises today, right? SREs taking problem reports, outages reports, test failures, uploading it into AI and seeing patterns they never saw before, right? Oh, the core weakness in our system is this widget over here. We'll try to do that with the system that is the human body, right? Look across all these thousands of test diagnostics of, I'll use Alzheimer's, CAT scans, even just reports from doctor interviews and stuff like that. Is there a pattern we're missing? That's the hope, the thing that like personally gets me excited. That, can we make advancements? We're not, AI isn't going to cure all our ills. I'd be a little worried if it magically did, but does it help us to start to make real advancements in some of those? That's the cool, exciting stuff, frankly. And the part of it that gets me excited.
Yeah. Like a lot of what you're talking about is, I don't really know the right word for it, but it's sort of like analysis. Analysis is too fancy of a word, but it's almost like more of what I have in my head is like the person who brings a stack of papers home with them and just keeps looking through it, like kind of the red string crazy board on their wall to try to look through something. And that, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong to limit it to this, but like in my experience and my very basic understanding of like generative AI stuff is that very rarely comes up with something new, right? Like there's not this like creativity so much to it, as much as you're saying, pattern matching and like finding things that are there. And of course, anticipating what the logical next thing would be. I mean, that's kind of the core of how it works, which for the scenarios you were describing, like if I were to, I guess a lot of diagnosing is pattern matching, right? Seeing what's there. And then also a lot of just any gigantic process like healthcare is also paperwork, right? Like both paperwork as far as running in a positive way to bureaucracy, but also like just the paperwork of just like looking through data, like you were talking about, looking through all this knowledge.
So much of healthcare is, I had this treatment for this thing, and we accidentally discovered it also helped this thing, right? And not to get into like uncomfortable or giggly of a subject, but right, the whole Viagra erectile dysfunction was a blood pressure medicine, that helped this. And I just bring it up because it's kind of the one everybody knows.
Right. And then you also have, I think you brought it up earlier, but you have the, that diabetes thing that helps out with obesity, right? That seems like an accidental discovery.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Zepic, again, it could be a whole nother topic. We're now discovering it may help with addictions, whether alcohol or opioid. Just a crazy number of studies going on that are adjacent for, this drug that started off as, hey, maybe we could help folks with type 2 diabetes.
And so given that kind of analysis and diagnostic stuff, I mean, it seems like there's a lot that you would apply, like enterprise AI to in healthcare. And so like then this gets to more of like what our business in the Tanzu world is, but like so when you either think through yourself or you're talking with people who are doing this, what is like the plan, right? Like they need the data, they need like the governance, they need some kind of like what I would call a product management cycle, like just discovering what to do and experimenting with it. But like, what's kind of like the toolbox that people need to just like start doing stuff with it?
The folks that are doing the research stuff, right? And we should at some point talk about the healthcare industry and how it's helping in similar ways to just like every other industry, to be honest. But the healthcare world, these folks are really, really good today at already. How do I take an idea, take my hypothesis, go through various trials, try things in a very safe, ethical, regulated way? That structure is there. AI is not going to, nor should it, frankly, go around or change that process.
Yeah. I guess there's other industries, but of very few other industries, healthcare is very scientific in what it does.
For us, for just frankly, our day jobs in the Tanzu world, there's a lot of geeky stuff that becomes really interesting. And to use that radiological example, I can't upload an MRI to the cloud, right? Despite all our advances today, hospitals don't have enough bandwidth, right? I mean, MRIs are just huge, gigabytes and gigabytes. So how do I do this dramatic AI helping in kind of to use another buzzword of the day, edge scenario? Right? How do I have a thin little office in a hospital that does that? There's a lot of innovation happening in the healthcare space there. How do I, if I find this great idea, how do I make it practical to the hospital in, a very rural area around the world that may have Starlink, may not have Starlink? How do I do it? So I don't think that's quite what you were asking, but I would say there's a ton of innovation and things as an industry we need to solve to bring some of this healthcare stuff to life, as opposed to the research stuff, which is, hey, give me all your GPUs and I'm just going to crunch this to see how to solve Alzheimer's. That bit's already there because they've been using a lot of that for drug and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good, helpful answer because, as the first two things you said, one, the first two things are in healthcare, people are very good at experimenting and just, I guess, to make a pun, generative experimenting, where you're trying things out to find out what works and you understand how a scientific experiment works. And then two, they're also very good at regulation and governance. Now, obviously there's that creates some friction and things like that, but in general, they're probably kind of like banks, one of the better industries when it comes to dealing with regulation and making it not shut everything down, which would seems like it'd be great for like AI stuff, because then you don't have to worry about that stuff so much. You just kind of fit it in to those processes.
And I think super importantly, medicine and healthcare research has an ethical framework too, where I think, when we talk about some of the AI stuff that's going out there, whether it's the Hollywood, right, making videos, making music, all of that, like what's the ethical impact of doing X, Y, or Z? The healthcare world, there is a whole structure around that and process. And I'm not going to pretend that the healthcare world always gets that right. Like it's not perfect, but the structure is there and it gets it right much, much more than it gets it wrong when it comes to, should we try this? Should we experiment? All of that's already there. I actually believe that'll be an accelerant for AI in the healthcare space, because it'll be forward, where I think a lot of other industries are going to go forward, hit a wall, have to take steps back, whether court mandated or whatever, and then kind of go forward.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. That's what we're talking about next is the the risk or the doom and gloom things, the FUD, right? And one of the main things people don't like about AI, which certainly, if it were affect me, I would not like it, is instead of augmenting people being co-pilots, as Microsoft would say, just replacing them. But it seems to me that in healthcare, there is such a lack of supply of skills that would be an impossible scenario. that basically, like, we're always looking for new, more nurses and doctors and radiologists and everyone skilled at it. That, like, any help you can give is like needed, and people would be very excited to have augmentation there.
I think that's true, right? The doom and gloom around AI in healthcare is somebody using it before it's ready, right? I can
Right.
hours about the FDA regulatory process and how long it takes, but there is a tremendous amount of safety behind it, right? Conspiracy theorists aside, It's a damn good system. It really is, as far as making sure treatments are safe before they're widely used.
And then how about like privacy and leaking concerns and things like that? Like what I mean, to as I like to do, ask a question and talk some more about it. Like I was thinking recently about privacy and leaking things, and it seems like if you don't let what you have leak back into the basic model, then you're fine. Like, I don't really know how this stuff works technically, as far as like writing data back that other people then use, but it seems like you can just not allow things to happen. I'm not quite sure, but like when it comes to like healthcare data, what are people thinking about there?
My personal risk around it isn't that this concept of AIs and using, right, GPT-4 as a base model and augmenting it with my local medical records. I totally contrived that scenario. I think as an industry, we've figured out, right, using RAG, using these various other approaches, how do I add my local data into the mix to the base model, but yet keep them separate? I think, I don't want to say it's solved.
Right.
We're on the large part. What I worry about from a privacy perspective is in the urgency to use all of this is we're just uploading, right? Again, even if I'm going to use this adjacent database, right, using RAG and vector and all these other things, I still probably am going to upload it somewhere. And then my fear is just, frankly, somebody leaving the S3 bucket exposed, right? Folks,
just standard data security problems.
I think that's probably the bigger risk, because we're all in a hurry, right? And because, right, I'll use Alzheimer's, right? Look, if somebody could like forget all the regulation and solve this for my mother tomorrow, I'd be really appreciative. And I might even be okay if you leak some of her data in the process. I hate to be that flippant, but around healthcare, a risk, and why I'm really glad we have these ethical structures we do, desperation comes into play, right? Very, very much so. And so, but anyway, I'm rambling. I think the issue I worry more about is folks now doing more with big data or these large data sets, uploading them, or frankly, new AI providers. I think OpenAI would be great at this. So excuse me for using them as an example, but I upload my medical record database next to OpenAI, and OpenAI just somehow leaves a backdoor open, right? I think OpenAI is really good. I shouldn't even use a brand, but I think just general data security, to your point, folks playing in areas that they aren't used to, right? Around this is the bigger issue. I don't think there's a leaking. I could see a startup in the AI space that, hey, I can review medical records. I can review your Epic data as a startup, right? Give me access to your Epic data, and I can find these patterns to, doctor, help you treat these patients better, which gets into a financial piece, right? And we can talk about revenue management in a minute for providers. In them just being new to the space and leaking data. But again, that has nothing. I don't think there's anything inherently in AI that's going to leak data. Not anything I know of or I'm aware of today, but just suddenly this many more people playing with data and uploading probably large data sets, just good old, to your point earlier, good old fashioned data security is probably the big risk.
Right. It's the, in a good way, it's the same problems we've had forever. like eventually the files have to be copied somewhere and be unencrypted for you to use them.
Yeah.
And so you have to make sure that the wrong people or the wrong thing doesn't happen to your unencrypted data, right? But you gotta, but there's not something inherent in the generative AI thing that requires you to leak information, or it makes that a lot easier. Like it's easy enough to protect things. Well, you brought up like revenue management, right? And I mean, there's obviously, well, not obviously, but many more scenarios when it comes to the, well, you have to tell me the terms, but the content,
right,
the actual practice of healthcare. But then there's the running all of this, the back end, if you will. And that seems like there's probably also a lot of things you could apply generative AI to in that area. So what are people doing there now, and what are they thinking about?
I think the big key here is we're now, so we just got done talking about, I think, what's unique about AI in healthcare. And now the other place that we're seeing it like in production and making a difference now is like everybody else, right? Those business process
right.
Type stuff. Revenue management, almost seems like a euphemism, but it's the back end of providers. And when I say provider, I mean doctor, hospital, clinic, lab, the people doing the healthcare stuff. The back office of that is generally referred to as revenue. That's the dealing with the insurance companies, and that's the part I would I'll talk about here in a second. Is the biggest example, and this is a U.S. Thing for those of you in the international markets. Feel free to turn this off for the next 5 minutes and laugh at the U.S. healthcare system. But this is the prior authorization space, right? Where as a provider, I have to ask the insurance company for almost anything that isn't an emergent. Can I, right? Can I please let do this back surgery on JT? Can I please do this MRI on JT? Right? That kind of stuff. We always hear the horrible story of prior authorization. Conceptually, it's there for fraud protection. It is also there conceptually to make sure you get the care you need and don't get the care you don't need, right?
Right.
There are downsides to endless CAT scans. That there really are, right? Radiation is a problem. So things like that. But that process is incredibly manual today, and I will.
Right.
Highly skilled, right? So as a provider, if I'm going to ask the insurance company for permission to do a back surgery, I have to know all these codes called ICD codes, and let's not go into that, but just know I've got to get the code right. I've got to get the text right, kind of the justification, the evidence, why I want to do this, right? And a certified doctor has to be the one to do this, right? So I can't be a doctor and put into my medical record system, I think JT needs a back surgery, and then have
right.
In a legal system, we've got the concept of the lawyer and the paralegal. We don't really have that for prior authorization, right? So there's entire management companies that have doctors that never see patients. So when you talk about capacity, right, we've got a huge number of doctors both working on the insurance company side and the back office revenue management side that are doing this. So a lot of prior authorizations get denied because they use the wrong code. They forgot to attach the test result, or they didn't, frankly, use the magic words in the justification, right? For all of that. So the generative AI, the AI you were talking about, is really coming to bear there and helping clean that up. R1RCM. Yay, what an acronym. It's actually the name of a company that does a lot of this revenue management stuff. They've really brought AI to bear in this, and they've been able to greatly reduce the rejection rates that are due to just paperwork, which is 90% of the rejections, by the way. And I think that number is actually right. We always hear about the horror story of they won't let my grandma have the cancer medicine she needs. That's a different story for a different day. But most prior authorizations, time and delay and rejections are paperwork errors, right? This is where just making a tremendous difference on accuracy, speed, and reducing the number of doctors that are doing this. So this is a little bit of a thought experiment, but maybe those doctors can get back in the caregiving game, right? Like it's really hard to get an appointment to get a physical here in the United States. It would be good if some of those doctors went back and did that. I don't know if they want to. Anyway, a lot of stories. But that is a space where, right, we're already seeing a material change using generative AI, creating the letter, so to speak. It's all electronic, but letter, getting the right codes and getting that prior authorization. tremendous, like real material advantages they're already seeing now.
Yeah, it's like another example of having the co-pilot, having the augmentation of what you're doing. And I was watching to try to be a little smart on this topic. I watched a few videos, and there was one from some UC Davis people talking about this topic, and I forget the person's name, unfortunately, but they brought up the great sort of. I love these kind of like scenes where they're like, anytime you go see a doctor, there's always a keyboard involved, and they're like typing things and like mousing around. So you didn't quite put it like this, but there's almost like there's a keyboard between the patient and the doctor, like time wise and sometimes physically, right? And like that seems, to use a layman's term, like a bunch of nonsense that doesn't need to exist. And it also seems like so it seems like a good example where you've got I don't know the terminology, but I think like training and reinforcement on both sides of the transaction, where the generative AI can like try to use the right words, and then on the other end you can verify that like these are the right words, and you could do some kind of like random checking in and to make sure that like, what would you call it, not the right words, but it didn't make up that these were the right words, right, because it wanted to try to do this even though it was unjustified. And if you allow this kind of like going back and forth, like it was, you were making me think of this scene from I don't know if you were a big Mad Max fan, but it was a TV show, and they of course it's a dystopia, so I'm going to ruin the coolness of what we're talking about. But there's a scene where someone has to go to court, and the two lawyers just put like their own discs into a computer, and then the disc like argue the case on either side. But a positive version of that kind of, it's almost a way of reducing like, oh, this was a bunch of nonsense we were doing. And because I would assume, because a lot of it has to do with trust is unfortunately an overloaded word, but there's not a way to establish trust between the insurance provider and the doctor where they would just trust the doctor would say like, yeah, they need a back surgery. And the insurance provider would be like, great.
You actually, so I'm going to say, right. And it's funny to use that Mad Max analogy of the two discs kind of arguing against each other. So the payer side, so the insurance, we talked about the revenue management side, the insurance company side of this prior authorization is also using AI to try to automate many more of these decisions, right? A lot of the decisions
right.
were automated before that. And when you talk about trust, I would say, yeah, it was automated trust, right? This doctor repeatedly has asked for this surgery. Every time we've approved it, we've never detected any indications of fraud, right? There isn't this guy that's required, right? You start to pre-AI, right? All of this was back to pattern matching, right? Well, just the same way that banks did credit card fraud for years, right? Is this one person constantly like requesting like 90% of the back surgeries we see? We might want to ask some questions, right?
Right.
Is there another back specialist that, boy, only asks for surgery for 1 out of 100 of his patients? The rest of the times we always see him walk the protocol, what we talk about, right? Hey, let's try the muscle relaxer first. Let's take an x-ray. Oh, let's try physical therapy, right? If somebody always follows that, and generally, by the way, gets good outcomes, because as an insurance company, I know whether or not you got healed or not, then you know what? I am just going to automatically yes. There's just like humans never even going to see it on the insurance side. The ones that humans see are
right.
the odd cases, are the ones that get kicked out of like, wait a minute, right? Or heart surgeon requests to do a back surgery. You know what? We should probably ask some questions, right, about this, that kind of thing. But seeing AI be able to do that at a much bigger scale. Now, this is a place where it's not in production yet that I know of. I should put that big caveat in there. But talking to friends back in the insurance world, and especially in the blues world, seeing a lot of experimentation where they're having the AI system make the first decisions on this, and then having humans look at them and go, hey, would I made the same decision? That's kind of where we're at right now. I don't know whether to call it experimentation or training, the model and things like that. But it is setting up this case, right? I do know of a case of where somebody's using this on the insurance side as an experimentation, and they're getting a lot of R1 RCM requests. So in my head, it is that exact scenario you talked about, right? These two AI bots fighting over and deciding whether or not you should get the back surgery. And that could be creepy. That can feel very uncomfortable. Like, wait a minute, why are the computers making these?
Yeah. Well,
right?
Well, I think in that scenario, what you would want instead of like the max headroom thing is, to stack it to be absurd, you would almost want a third AI or a third disk you put in there that was like, all right, now we're going to standardize how this is done, so you don't have to do that in the first place, right? It's just like we're going to come up with a better scheme because as a US person, like you would kind of know this intuitively, but maybe other people is like the problem you just described assumes a one-to-one relationship between provider and a health insurance company. But we have a uncountable to uncountable relationship. I guess you could count the number of insurance providers in the States, but like there's a lot of different things. So not only, I mean, that's where things get crazy is there's just so many combinations of that single discussion that happens that you do need some augmentation to deal with all of that. Is it a permutation or a combination? I was bad at math, but all of those various mix.
Yeah, I mean, look, sign me up to burn the current U.S. healthcare system down and come up with a new one. But we've got to make do with the one we have. And yeah, a lot of those problems that you just talked about, right, are so many tech firms or large retail firms have thought they could just crack this healthcare nut, and they haven't. It's been a train wreck lately of folks trying new things in the healthcare world from a business model perspective, and absolutely nothing sticking.
So as a transition to like general digital healthcare stuff, as we're talking through this, one of the things I was wondering is like who does this innovation in healthcare? Like maybe I'm totally wrong, but I don't think, I wouldn't imagine that in even kind of a medium, large size hospital system, they have a lot of programmers who are like writing applications and doing this. And so like a lot of, in my mind, a lot of what we talked about is just like, here's generic, and here's a general purpose generative AI engine. And now we need to write a bunch of applications. And that might be like, not the most beautiful AI and beautiful UIs, but like some kind of application development you're doing. But where's that done in the healthcare system?
So most of the healthcare back office stuff is outsourced these days, right? Or vendor sourced. Outsourced has a weird connotation to it.
Right.
Like this revenue management thing that I was just talking about that providers and hospitals do. They generally contract with firms to do that. Now, there are exceptions. The very large healthcare systems in the world are in the US, right? I'm thinking of the HCAs, which kind of covers the whole Southeast United States with hospitals and clinics. They're big enough. They have a lot of their own developers. Frankly, they're doing a lot of development for stuff that we talk about, right? Backstage development and things like that even. So they're actually themselves doing, a lot of this, but most, right? When you think of hospitals, back offices, these business processes, there's vendors that are doing this innovation that are
right.
And they're doing it for their own selfish needs of, hey, if you're still going to pay me $1 per prior authorization, it's not that, by the way, I just make that up. And I can do that without having a doctor in the mix. I can, make a lot of money. That kind of thing.
So who, like in at least in the States, like who are those vendors? Like I know Epic is one, but that's it. That's my novice understanding. But who, what's the set of those vendors?
So there's the EMR providers that we talk to in the hallways of conferences and stuff like that, and they're trying to experiment with it. Epic, Cerner, Meditech, those kind of people. R1 RCM is a revenue management. I hate to keep using that. Good friends, the head of architecture there, is why I know them so well. Things like that. The insurance companies, they're doing this themselves. They have traditionally done a lot of software development and experimentation.
Right. That would make sense. Yeah.
But then we're also seeing like the big SIs, right? The Cognizants, the Accentures, Deloittes, all of those folks are doing a lot of this and trying a lot of this and then bringing it back to their customers. That's where we're seeing a lot of this happen right now.
And then again, in the scope of the US, like do things like the VA and I always get Medicare and Medicaid mixed up unless I think about the little poem about them or whatever. But like if you look at those big, I wouldn't call them like shadow healthcare, but like people don't always think about those as huge monolithic healthcare institutions. Do they have like their own
Yeah, I mean,
innovation staff, their own development staff, or do they also just work with these other providers?
the VA works a lot with providers. Now, I think that what I don't know, and actually it's your question just made me want to go ask questions and research over the next couple of weeks, right? There's been in the US the whole move to a lot of divisional development by the government itself, right? Whether it's stuff we do at VMware with some of the military branches, in the Tanzu world,
right? Like software factories,
right? Software factories and things like that, but also just in other parts of the government as well. I don't know if they're making an impact on the VA, but the VA generally, a big exception here, has always been very vendor sourced. Cerner being the one that's having a little bit of a bump in the road trying to roll out a new EMR there. As a matter of fact, a little bit is a big bump in the road trying to roll that out. So I don't see a lot of government activity. Medicare, right, is more of a set of regulations than it is an insurance company. Medicare,
I guess so.
Outsourced to various insurance companies under the guise of Medicare Advantage. So,
I guess the Medicare and Medicaid. I could imagine there are a lot more of the revenue management, as you say, just sort of like managing the back end of stuff.
There are as much regulatory frameworks as they are actually a thing. And so most of that work, the thing I just talked about, right, the revenue management and the insurance company, that's the same for Medicare and Medicaid or commercial that you get through your employer, or maybe even individual insurance you buy yourself. Those structures and how that money flows is all the same. There's just a regulatory framework and some price controls around it for Medicare and Medicaid, frankly.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to. It'd be interesting to see like what in the UK, like what the NHS does and how they're structured. And I think where I live in the Netherlands, I'll have to ask about that too, because the Netherlands has this weird. Well, I'm sure the Dutch love it, but compared to the system we just went over, this kind of weird in a good way system of, I don't know, there's like 5 or 6 insurance providers, and as far as I can tell, they're so regulated, they're basically the same. Yeah. But whatever, they've got that interesting hybrid system. But anyhow. So the other thing that I was curious to ask about is just like, in addition to AI, like whether it's like, well, let's call it business innovation made possible by digital stuff.
Yeah.
Like that's interesting to go over. And the thing that brought this up is I was just looking through my, whatever, I guess is it called ham? Whatever it is between email you like and spam. Like promotions that you have. And I got one, of course, I got one from Amazon Prime going over like their Prime healthcare. And I was looking through it, and it seemed like, I don't know, it seemed interesting. But then also I know that we even talked about this a couple of years ago. There have been some experiments like at Walmart and other places to have, and I think CVS had some of these to have sort of like, you have to tell me the term for this, but like, mid-tier, the middle of healthcare stuff done more affordably. So first of all, what do you call that whole area? And then what's going on in that area? Like, is it working out? Like, what's up with it at the moment?
6 questions in one there. The snarky answer to what you're looking for is doc in the box. And that's where
right.
Carve out a corner of your Walmart. Frankly, not frankly, but carve out a corner of your Walmart and set up a general practice clinic. So it's something more than urgent care, although some of those were set up as urgent care too. Like, I cut my hand or hit my head, right? Some of those kind of things. But also to be more general practice. So the one thing we know in the United States is there is not, and you and I briefly touched on this earlier, capacity, right? Especially in the rural areas, to just get folks in to get a physical, to a checkup, or even when they don't feel good, to actually go see a doctor. Because if I can see you early on and treat you, I can keep you from getting worse, right? So it's actually, even if I'm only going to look at it from a system dollars perspective, I would much rather you get into the doctor more often, frankly. That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna watch how much of the big fancy procedures that are really expensive you get, but I really want you to go to the doctor fairly often, and that's not very possible. Like, it's even in a very metro area that I am, right? Getting an appointment to get a physical is very hard. So the idea that the Walmarts of the world, the Walgreens that already have footprints in these rural areas in a large number, if they could stand up these clinics, the concept was, boy, we could increase capacity. But then if I'm Walmart, if I get big enough, I can then negotiate with insurance companies like I do with the maker of paper towels, right? Like Walmart has a huge advantage of being able to go to their suppliers and go, no, I'm only going to pay 50 cents. I'm not going to pay $1 and you're going to like it, right? Because I'm so big and I'm so key to the market and things like that. Kind of inverting that to the insurance company and going, no, insurance company, I'm so vital to you being able to sell your insurance because I'm so much a percentage of your doctors. You're going to pay me $1 instead of 50 cents. Like that was the quick example of how this would work. And it just hasn't.
Sure.
And I don't know why. I mean, I can be smart.
Right.
They just couldn't get in there. So, but Walmart just in the last month announced they're shutting down this entire concept. And that's huge, right? And it's having some secondary effect for some big vendors, by the way, too. Think EMR providers, cloud providers, and stuff like that. But that Walmart's doing this. Walgreens tried the same thing. They bought Village MD, which was these doctors that would be in shopping centers, and we're going to bring them into their Walgreens clinics. They've had to walk that back. Just it hasn't been financially really good. It hasn't worked, and so they're shutting that down. There's been a lot of these retail companies, and I'm going to call Amazon a retail company for the purpose of my discussion here. I know they're many things, right? But retail companies trying to solve this problem. I think because a little bit out of arrogance, they thought they could do it and nobody else would. Some of it's their scale. We're big enough. We can really do this. And it just hasn't worked. We've seen over the last 6 months, especially, so many of these things being walked back and shut down. And just, it's not very profitable. You could look at CVS, Walgreens, Amazon in the past with several iterations of this. You can go back to Amazon and Haven, right? That was their partnership with Berkshire Hathaway and was it JP Morgan? Excuse me if I get
JP Morgan.
Yeah, where they were going to solve insurance and that just didn't work either. It's such a regulatory mess. I mean, I joke that you have to burn it all down. If you're going to make a material change to the U.S. healthcare system, it's probably political and regulatory that's going to do it, and we don't have the environment for that. To come back and talk about Amazon Health, right, which is what they just have been not spamming but hamming, to use your term, everybody about of late. That's kind of an iteration on Teladoc, something that existed before COVID, but really exploded during COVID and became normal during COVID. The idea that I could chat with a doctor on my phone and get some basic medical or maybe do a video call, not different from what you and I are doing here with a doctor. For many things, the doctor doesn't have to touch and feel. From that perspective, maybe it's cold and flu. In fact, if I'm the doctor, I don't want you in my office. I do not, right?
Sure.
Spread it.
Yeah. So
I'm interested to see if this works. And it works just by the meaning, can you get enough people to use it? I will say, I assumed Amazon was going to require you to use their pharmacy and deliver their drugs, and they aren't. That is very, very interesting. I'm sure you can use Amazon Pharmacy. That has been something that's been pretty successful for Amazon, by the way, and the healthcare, is they bought PillPack 5 years ago now. Boy, don't quote me on that timeline. And have really done a good job of, sending you your blood pressure medicine every month and all of that kind of stuff, and making some good money at it. But trying to see if this Teladoc method works. I hope it does. I will say I use a variety of it. A different vendor. If you've ever heard me talk about healthcare, I've tried to go this whole conversation without mentioning Zoom Care, but I'm going to mention it once because I'm a fan, not an investor. That's really kind of a hybrid of the two. And so it works. And again, if we can get folks that don't have regular access to doctors to use that, it can be fairly inexpensive. The magic bullet for Amazon will be, can they get the insurance reimbursement? So will the insurance company pay Amazon for that visit at a rate not the same as you going into a doctor's office, but enough to make money? That always seems to be the crux of this. Well,
you did a good job of responding with 10 topic ideas to my 6 questions. So that's we've matched up there. And I think like of many of the things there, what's interesting is to try to figure out, I'll say constraints, but the constraints to deal with there. Because, the first one you brought up is, I mean, it's one of the old Michael Porter 5 forces of strategy, is the relationship between supplier and supplied to, right? And like if you as a company or an organization control your suppliers, then that's kind of these, as you say, doc in a box we're going for, is that if we're a giant company, our suppliers, we can command a lower price from our suppliers. And the positive version is also we can maybe drive some efficiency and standardization, right? Like the suppliers sort of kind of would like to sell to less people to have more of a guaranteed revenue stream. I don't know. I mean, that all depends, right? On again, that dynamic of control between the supplier, the seller and the buyer. But so there's like that one constraint, but then as you bring up, it didn't work. It wasn't like a magic panacea, which could mean all sorts of things. But that is really interesting, that you can't get the efficiencies of paper towel buying for cold diagnostics or something like that, right? And so, and yes, then the other thing that you bring up that is interesting is, you especially see this when you have kids, and you learn this when you've had like a second or third kid, is really you just need to call and say, like, my kid has 102 fever. And they're like, call me back tomorrow if they have 102 fever. And if they have it on a third day, then actually bring them in, right? Whereas, I don't know about you, but we had your first kid, just like, oh my God, he seems they seem sluggish. I'm going to the doctor, right? And so there is kind of that screening that you would hope, like in telemedicine and doc in a box stuff, that you could just, I mean, especially in healthcare, triage means something a little more dramatic, but you could kind of like filter out like things that are easier to solve, that don't consume your constrained resource of the healthcare people.
Yeah, for sure. And the idea that, look, I can prescribe you this, and that's probably going to solve it, like with a 90% confidence, and it doesn't have a downside of trying, right? That's always the other side of Medicare. Then I'm just going to like have you go take that medicine and try it. And that's probably going to solve you. And it saved you from driving, and it saved you from standing in another crowd of people and giving it to other people. Right. But it also, frankly, gets people to come and talk about things that they may not want to. So the idea, right, I can say things to a chatbot that I might not want to say to you in a room. Right. And again, this is where we get into things like sexual health and all of that. And while they're tongue in cheek and people like to giggle about them, they're really important. Right. But there are other medical issues too, right? That people are just frankly embarrassed about their bodies or whatever. And if you can get them to open up in a remote sense, we do see people say things in this environment, like you and I are, that they wouldn't necessarily say in person or being comfortable with a person. And as a doctor, that's a very positive thing, right? You might say something that says, hey, I know you're uncomfortable, but I really need you to get in here. And that's a viable outcome to that. But a lot of times, if I can get people to talk about them, I can get them happier and healthier, right? Mental health is just as important as physical health, right? And so,
right,
yeah, I'm hopeful, right? This is a case where I generally want them to go to Amazon, and we more normalize this.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Maybe that to bridge to other interesting things going on in healthcare is the mental health angle seems almost like, I mean, I'm well past the thing of doing the anti-pattern of some outsider amateur trying to diagnose a complicated system. But that said, as a consumer of the complicated system, like, until COVID stuff, like the therapist I used to see back in Texas, like wouldn't see people online, and then they had to, and they realized it's totally fine, or at least it's a lot better than zero, so to speak. And so I don't know if this is true, but it seems like the supply of therapists is maybe less constrained than the supply of doctors. Or, I don't know, maybe it could be. Maybe that's just like a supply and demand problem. Like not as many people see therapists as would be helpful. So there's a better equilibrium there. But that seems like a good experimentation area that you could get a lot of learning about how to do I guess it's remote stuff, but also just the efficiency of it. Because I think it's also, I mean, the amount of money that I pay my therapist per session is relatively low to back surgery,
Right.
right? So the back end part seems like it's a lot easier than others.
Yeah, there were more therapists than medical doctors, and I would strongly disagree. I would say one of the top 5 biggest problems we have right now in the U.S. anyway. I don't know how this plays in Europe or Asia or other places. Is folks that want mental health treatment, and whether that's just a therapist or even something more, right? Versus the supply is really off. Like, it is really hard to find a therapist that your insurance covers. That's a very US thing. But and then get an appointment when somebody is in like distress, right? Because it's one thing to say, well, you know what would really help me is some therapy. Okay, it's going to take me 3 weeks to get an appointment. Versus teenager or somebody else who's in really some distressed environment, right? Having some very ideation type thoughts and stuff like that. And then it takes 3 weeks to get and find somebody. And it's all
right. You need like urgent care for therapy, basically.
Yeah.
Right? Which
right.
is Okay. No, that's good to know. And I mean, I guess it gets back, the question I was having about constraints is it seems like the number one constraint is just supply. Like, there's just not enough people who can supply the healthcare that you need. And so, just to repeat it goes back to what we're saying. It's any way you can augment that supply. Yep. There's going to be huge advantages that you have. And then you also have the I don't know if it's compounding, but you also have all of the bottlenecks and friction of regulation and that very many to many complicated system we were talking about that just kind of piles things on top of it. But maybe to be a little more optimistic, like what are other areas in healthcare that, like, if you look at like applying IT or just like better software or whatever that you see people being successful with?
Yeah, I'll come back to some of the stuff we already talked about that really does have me excited, right? The research side of this, that is starting to be really cool. I think the training aspects of this, getting doctors to be able to do more intricate, harder things and giving them experiments. I don't know how super public it is, so I'm not going to use their name, but there is a vendor that does a lot of robotic type surgery kind of things, like tools that can help a doctor, that is kind of now like using technology, all the buzzwords, right? AI and all sorts of stuff, but to allow kind of simulations of that. Like, how can I, as a doctor, don't necessarily get the touch and feel, but walk through that intricate cardiac surgery, removing a blockage in a very touchy space and things like that, and allow me to do it, or allow complications to pop up in the middle of that, right? VR.
Oh, right.
That's the acronym I couldn't pull out a second ago. Using some of that. There's a lot of cool things. I think personally, we're going to make some real advances in some really tough areas we haven't been able to crack before, or fast enough, whether it's some cancers out there. I'll use the one that I'm passionate about right now, Alzheimer's, right? ALS, some of those things. I really bet in the next, 4 to 5 years, we see some real, no, I don't want to say cures, but some treatments and being able to really make some steps forward where we haven't before, and give people some real hope and positive change in their life environments. And then I'll come back to Ozempic, right, to talk about semaglutides being the type of drugs that's the diabetic drug that became everybody's using for weight loss. And now we're finding all these secondary and tertiary benefits too. But if we can really start to solve some of the obesity issues in the US, and some of those are genetic, some of those are behavioral, all of that kind of stuff, we can really start to impact the aging curve. So all of that takes technology behind the scenes, right? And I'm super excited to kind of start to see some impacts there in the next 4, like I said, kind of 5-year horizon, which is what I think about. It could be really, really cool.
Yeah. There is, I don't know if this is necessarily the case, but at least as an industry, it seems like, like going all the way back to the beginning, we were talking about how when it comes to learning how to apply generative AI, healthcare is pretty well set up because they already have an experimental mindset in place. And then it's also already, they know how to work within a governed framework and how to do things carefully like that, which, little startups don't, like all those things. And, there's to think about. So I was asking where the innovation happens, and it can be a drawback if you have a handful of people doing that innovation, if they're not innovating, if they're not changing. However, if they are working on new ways of doing things, there's a benefit because if you have, I'm just making the numbers up, you have 5 people supplying the software, quote unquote, everyone uses. That means once those 5 people figure it out, they can quickly get it out to everyone. You don't have to rely on independently doing that. So that has a huge advantage to it as well. And I think the other advantage is just like, this is overstating it a little bit, but a lot of those tools are just ready to be used, and people can just start experimenting with how to apply like generative AI or other things. They just sort of like have to will it. They have to decide to do it and start to deploy it, which I think is handy. And, to be a little crass commercially, right? Like that is some of the people you mentioned. I know they use the, our Tanzu application service or Tanzu Platform. And so it's a good example again of that limited supplier thing where generative AI stuff and managing all your application workflows already built into that. You can just start using it. And about this enterprise AI stuff, who are using that in the Tanzu platform, or other ones, it's just in there. So you can decide to start doing it. You don't have to, download one of the models and figure out how to do everything with it, which is handy. It's unlike some other innovations in the past where you really do have to do it all from scratch, which is hopeful. Well, as always, this has been great. I know you've got a where do you put your stuff nowadays? Probably in LinkedIn, like everywhere else. Where would you point people?
LinkedIn. I still hang out on the X occasionally, or what the site formerly known as Twitter, and Blue Sky as well. But Circle JTP will find me on most social media, and then JT Perry under LinkedIn is where I'm doing a lot of stuff as well.
Yeah, I think for most people, Twitter is now your ex social media location instead of your current one. Well, with that clever turn of phrase, as always, this has been Tanzu Talk. If you want to find show notes, you can either look at the video where you might have watched this, or you can go to tanzutalk.com and look this episode up. And it has been a while. If you're listening in serial, it has been a while since we published something. But I've got several more things lined up and in the works. So there'll be more of a return to what we're doing here. And as always, thanks for listening. We'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.